the VCA Voice podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marie Kerl. Our goal with the VCA Voice is to showcase how VCA Animal Hospitals is taking care of the future of veterinary medicine. We'll bring our purpose to life through meaningful conversations about care, our culture, and the communities we serve. On today's episode, we're chatting with Dr. Tony Guerino about leadership in veterinary medicine. Listen in. Hi, Tony. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Marie.
How are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you.
So we're going to start off with, tell me a little bit about what drew you to veterinary medicine. How did you end up here instead of as an English major, since I know that you love reading and language?
We're looking for an origin story here. That's a really good question. And I really never had a good answer for that. I've always wanted to be a veterinarian. My mother tells me since I was 5, I've been talking about it. And it sort of seemed to be my direction. We didn't have this big pantheon of animals, or when growing up, we occasionally had a dog, but there was something about it. I think a part of it was the science, part of it was the discovery, part of it was the ability to not be, I won't say pigeonholed because that's rude to our human medicine colleagues, but I'm going to say it anyway, pigeonholed in one specific thing, that we could look at the whole scope of things. So I was very lucky to be hired as a very awkward teenager at 14 to a local veterinarian who helped me in the path and was very, very kind to me. I never left New England, and when it was time for college, I decided to make the big move and went to undergraduate work at Michigan State. It was a good exposure to other things. I had a lot of experience with agricultural people who I'd never had experience before. I found out that all creatures big and small was a big to-do, which I'd never heard of. So that was something that I was exposed to. And actually that's where my first exposure to birds came in. As a pre-veterinary student at the time, your choices were either to go into a poultry husbandry class or do a ruminant nutrition class. That was a prerequisite to continue your pre-veterinary casework. And rumor had it, and only rumor, I don't know if any of this was true, is that the ruminant nutrition guy only liked his ag tech people and wasn't really fond of the pre-vet students. So that was enough information for me to say, well, let's do poultry science. And that was probably one of the top classes that I had at Michigan State. I loved it. He was passionate about it. I learned so much about something I had absolutely no clue about. And they were such an interesting group of animals, such interesting species, so resilient. The fact that they give you stuff at the end of the day in the beautiful form of eggs, and egg being, in his words, the perfect food, all sort of resonated with me. And so as I got accepted to veterinary school at Tufts, that came to be something that I was interested in. But again, I was interested in everything because that's what happens when you're in veterinary school. Everything's fascinating.
It is. It's amazing. And actually, that story kind of leads me into another question. I speak to lots of new veterinarians and recent graduates, and I hear from so many of them that they want to work in zoo medicine and exotic pet care. Yet the reality is it's a difficult area to get a specialty in. And I think a lot of those early career veterinarians just don't pursue that. How were you successful at making that such a big part of your practice?
Well, that's a really good question. I think part of it was a different time. At the time that I graduated, there were no specialties in exotic animal medicine. What happened was there would be someone in your area who was interested in it and did some work on it. For me, it was one of those things. I had gone into an area where there was someone already seeing birds, so I didn't see much of a caseload as far as that was concerned, but small mammals, reptiles, all were not being serviced. So to me, it was a situation where I had to learn on the spot and had to find information, which meant going to laboratory animal medicine books and other resources that were just really hard to find. The internet did not exist then, Marie, believe it or not. There was a time before the internet, so that wasn't even available. I had one time, very, very early in my career, that I had a mini lop come in, mini lop rabbit, and it was seizuring. Oh. And we had gotten it stabilized, got it on some benzos. And the question was, we should probably start this little guy on some phenobarbital. So checked on the resources, didn't have any. I couldn't find any resources. I called Angel. They didn't know, but whoever the clinician was at the time said, hey, when you find out, let me know. Called AMC. I had been there for just about a week. It was actually the time when you were there. I should have gotten you on the phone. It was a shame I didn't. But I talked to whomever there. They said, oh, that's a really good question. I have absolutely no idea. And this went on for about 3 or 4 or 5 people. Eventually got a gentleman who worked in large rabbitries in the Midwest somewhere, I think Iowa. And I think his name was Dr. Perry Reed, but I could be wrong. And he wasn't, so I called his clinic. He wasn't there. He was actually at a conference in Baltimore, called, but said, here's the number. And so I called the conference in Baltimore. I actually called his hotel. He returned my phone call kindly enough and got the answer. I said, sure, you can do it. What's the dose? Oh, same like you'd use in a dog or a cat. All right. And then I had to call 5 people back. But that was the way of information was permeated. And it was a little bit more hit or miss. It was a little bit extrapolating. I had some really nice exposure by Charles Sedgwick, who was at the San Diego Zoo before he came to Tufts, and then he went to Los Angeles Zoo afterwards, who really gave me some nice exposure to what happens when you have something that you have no idea the physiology. You have a rough indication as to what's going on. Now, what do you do? And so that was a really nice, helpful hint into things. And that's something actually that's carried over for the rest of my medicine.
How should we be working with our newest colleagues in the profession who really want to pursue that area as a part of their practice? And how would you advise them or guide them to be able to do that?
And this is really exciting now because it's so much easier. To me, where I still am curious about just about everything, it allows you to practice veterinary medicine. I don't want to say the way it used to be, but I don't know, in its purest form. Here you have hundreds of different species that aren't being taken care of by most people, and it gets on your lap. And now here's your mystery. Here's your discovery. Here is where your opportunity is to try and make a huge impact, where otherwise this poor little thing wouldn't be serviced and would suffer. And I think that's fascinating. And that's really the essence of veterinary medicine, is taking care of those noble creatures and giving them the dignity that they deserve and the respect that they deserve.
You know, you touched on something just now that is another area that I want to talk with you about. And you and I have been out in practice for a similar period of time, graduated at about the same time. And another passion of yours is anesthesia, analgesia. How have you managed to stay as current and up to date as you have in those areas?
It's not easy, and I'll push back and say I don't know how current I am these days. It's very difficult. Information is changing at a rapid pace. I'm lucky now that I have a lot more freedom to delve into these things. There was a time, again, before the internet and even after the internet, because I'm a little bit of a slower adapter, where it would take a while. I would get, and I know you did the same thing, reams of magazines. I would get. Every time I go to a conference, they'd recommend doing this, doing that. I was getting the New England Journal of Medicine at one point in time and a couple other human publications, along with every veterinary publication that I could think of. And so my office was a mass of floor-to-ceiling magazines, and I'd skim them, and I said, oh, I have to get back to this. Internet does that in a little bit more efficient manner. I think it's very hard to look at these things objectively. I'm thankful that the RMDs have a journal club, because that to me allows me or teaches me how other people in other disciplines are able to look at data a little bit more objectively. I had taken a class on looking at papers, and it gave me new insight. And so if you're naturally curious, you'll go and say, that's interesting. And that leads you down this beautiful rabbit hole of information where you look at one thing and then you see an interesting paper, and then it gives another thing and knows another thing. And I think that's helpful.
I'm going to pivot just a little bit and tell me your story of when you joined VCA and how you progressed between that time in your life and becoming regional medical director.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I had no intentions after I graduated of doing private practice. That wasn't my deal. Whatever I had in my mind, I was going to do research and had prepared to do that. Now, granted, I had never done more good research before. But I thought that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do academia. And so what I was going to do, my significant other at the time was in school. And so I was going, while she was finishing up her degree, I was going to go and do some small animal practice. And so I had lasted 6 months at my previous practice, had nothing to do with my mentor, the gentleman who I grew up learning from and idolizing. I just really did not enjoy working and living in my hometown. It just wasn't a good fit for me then, wasn't a good fit for me as an adult. So I had an opportunity to go to New Hampshire. I did. So 6 months out of veterinary school, I found myself running a practice for someone in beautiful city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So I did that for a while, and then I put in my 4 or 5 years and said, okay, it's time to leave, and let's talk about the finances. And we had some questions about the finances. And he said, well, instead of giving you the money, I can go ahead and sell you the practice. And at that point, life had changed. I had 2 children. Financially, it was a smart option to buy the practice. So I put those things aside and I went into private practice. And I had been working overnights as well as during the days at an emergency practice. So I just expanded that. And so when we took over the practice, we were a 3-doctor practice and we were open 24/7. Wow. Not a brilliant idea if anybody's thinking about that right now.
I'm thinking about the hours associated with that.
Yeah. So that wasn't a good idea. But I had done that but I did that, then grew the practice, and it did very, very well. There came a time where time was prosperous, not quite as prosperous as it's lately, but during 2000s, I couldn't maintain the being open 24/7. So we were open 7 days a week instead. We were up to 4 or 5 doctors. And by 2005, my significant other at the time was done with veterinary medicine. Soon she would be done with me too, but that's another story altogether, but that's all right. And so we decided to sell the practice. And at the time, that was 2004, 2005, selling the practice was a little bit of a different scenario than it is here, because I think we had about I had 3 groups who were actually remotely interested. One was VCA, one was Healthy Pet, which we ended up buying 2 years later. And the other one was VetCor. VetCor wasn't actively buying. Healthy Pet did not make a really attractive offer. And VCA was upfront and they were honest. So we decided to go with VCA. And my thought was, you know what? I still wanted to do the research thing. So I'll stick around for the 2 years that they're asking me for. And that's what happened. But then 2 years became 3. Life changed. There were some life changes that went on there. I got a lot of support, had a great time, and said, oh, maybe I could stick around for a little while longer. I had toyed with the idea of doing some leadership, but you live in a bubble when you're a veterinarian, when you're a solo practitioner. Oh, yeah. You think of all the wonderful things people tell you. You ignore the constructive criticism that people tell you. And you think you're the best thing since sliced bread. So I was looking for a hospital manager, and my ROD at the time, Kara Casamasima, and I sat on an interview, and we sat there. And at the end of the interview, we kind of looked at one another and said, "Oh my God, we can't just hire her right away, can we? We got to pretend like we're actually vetting the situation." So that woman was Lauren McVeigh, who is a senior regional vice president now for VCA. And it was a wonderful experience. It was the smartest thing I've ever done. It was just the easiest hire that I'm sure both myself and Kara have ever done. It was just it was like someone giving you a gift. And that was a wonderful learning experience for me, because I found out through some constructive criticism that I wasn't right all the time, that there were ways of handling these things, that there were ways of getting what you wanted to have done in a constructive manner that didn't leave everybody offended. And that allowed me to go ahead and look and work with the 3 other hospitals, I think at the time in New Hampshire, and we worked together on some things, and that led to being area medical director.
Tell me about the job of being regional medical director and what some of the great things are about it, and maybe 1 or 2 not great things that you wish that were different or better.
Sure. Well, no, everything's perfect and everything's wonderful. That's what I'm supposed to say, right? That's okay. Um, so part of the attractive part of being a regional medical director is even though there's a job description, there's really no job description. It's open. Mm-hmm. You are the medical face of your region. Mm-hmm. So for me, I am gifted in the fact that I have probably the most ridiculous group of experienced operators I could ever imagine. Mm-hmm. You know, our senior regional vice president knows more than anybody I've ever met about veterinary medicine. We have our operators are brilliant and know operations. But then it comes to me to add a medical aspect of things. So that part is really intriguing because it's, again, another learning experience. I'll have a case report or a case review to look at, and I'll go, how could we have done better by this patient? And we'll look into it. And again, as you know, as someone who's being naturally curious as well, you go into a rabbit hole and you go, if I had done this, where would that have led us to? Mm-hmm. And so part of that is a really fun part of things. It's more learning. I love engaging with veterinarians because part of what we do is teaching. It's one-on-one, hands-on teaching as far as skills. I teach a lot of surgery, obviously teach a lot of Zoom ed skills when allowed, anesthesia, pain management are all things that I really enjoy and become ridiculously giddy when we start talking about those things. Skill levels and leadership, communication are a really big aspect of things. If I can do one thing for a veterinarian for skills, it's never going to be surgery or medicine. It's going to be communication because that's where the breakdown tends to be. I consider myself a decent communicator. I could always improve. And again, every time I do a lab on the communication, it's a learning experience. And so those are the intriguing parts, working with young veterinarians in that opportunity to get veterinarians excited and to let them know that there's going to be bad days. But in the end, every day isn't playing with puppies and kitties, but guess what? You get to play with puppies and kitties, and it really doesn't get any better than this. When I go into a hospital and there's something that needs our attention and gives me a little bit of a tail wag, a little bit of a purr, that's what I came here to do. And lighting that fire that's already existing in these veterinarians is probably the best thing I could ever do. As far as not so fun things, the hardest part of our jobs as veterinarians is the people. And sometimes, whether it's a client or it's an associate, we behave badly. And it's not, I don't blame anybody for it. It's just we are acting at an emotional level, emotional fear level. And that can be the hardest thing. It can be sad when I don't get to promote someone and bring someone up, which is what I want to do, and have to say, no, you weren't, there were better ways of doing these things. Mm-hmm. When clients have concerns, that can be challenging because, again, it's coming from an emotional level. And they're just sad because something didn't go right. And so we're hitting them there and getting people to understand that no one started their day wanting to do wrong by you or especially your pet. Mm-hmm. So that part is the most challenging aspect, and learning to deal with that, because that is the thing that's most taxing on our staff, is a challenge. I'm still learning to deal with it 30-something years later. So someone who's out for 6 months, I know it's going to hit hard. And how can I support them through this? It can be tough times. Yep. And I've seen it make some really talented people leave the profession. And that makes me very, very sad.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's such an important area of focus that we learn and help to coach people on communication, as well as, really just being there to support them on a bad day as well as on the good days. We are working on ways to make it easier for those in our hospitals to care for pets at all levels. We're, in support office and in field, I know we're really focused on that. Tell me a little bit about how that initiative is going in Heartland, and what are the roles of technicians and customer service reps in that, and the whole hospital team?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And it's been an interesting journey. I'll have to be honest, when I first heard about it, we had already had something underway. Mm-hmm. So the start of every year, we talk about what we're going to focus on. And so part of what we picked up was efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Garrett and you and Todd brought up this whole idea of looking at, instead of efficiency, making caring easier for pets, that sort of resonated fairly well with us. And so you said, all right, well, we're on our way. We've got a good point. So let's talk about this. And so we introduced it to the group and said, right now times are tough, where everyone's short-staffed. There's not enough veterinarians, not enough technicians. We have CSRs leaving the field just because it's so tough to deal with this on a daily basis. How can we make things easier? And the way we handled it, I think, is a way most people handle it. We looked at them, we sat and said, hey, what's your pain points? What are you guys struggling with? Let's make a list. And this approach, again, is one of those things that sets with me and says, oh, great, this is a great preparation for the future. And we said, what are your pain points? And we're going to put them in columns. We're going to put them in some things we can take care of now, some things that we're going to take care of 6 months to a year from now, and some that are going to take 5 years. So if you wanted, a 50,000 square foot addition to your hospital and your $1 million practice, it's probably not going to happen. Well, at least not right now. We're going to work towards it, but it's not going to happen right now. But what's bugging you right now that we can fix right now that's going to make your life easier? Because if I make your life easier, what we're going to do is you're going to come home on time. You're going to have better work-life balance. You're going to be nicer to the staff. The staff is going to be able to practice the way they want to. It's going to be a much better culture. So that was probably the goal. What we found, and again, I believe this is true in most of our hospitals, was that we have this great group of professionals, our veterinary technicians, our veterinary assistants, that really were being underutilized. And it wasn't purposefully. It's that we're having the time to train and having the time to develop. And so for a lot of our hospitals, it's saying, all right, how do we want to do this? And let's get on the same page. Let's develop standard operating procedures for the hospital, because I can't do it for VCA in general, because in my world, a 1 doctor practice or 2 doctor practice is not going to work the same way as VCA Aurora, which is almost 200 employees. So that's not going to fly. But what can we do based on some general information? Can you develop practices that are going to be good for your hospital? Not only are we going to do that, we're going to make sure everyone has some degree of input, because everyone's going to be doing these things. We're going to ask you to do what you're doing and saying, hey, let's reevaluate. Let's come up with a plan. Let's ask why. Why are we doing these things? And how can we do it? Because that's the aspect of medicine. And it was easy to do for doctors because every way you analyze these situations is the same way we analyze every patient. So every time we have an issue coming in for someone who's not doing well, we look at them, we do a physical exam, we do an assessment, we come up with rule outs, we get on a problem list, we develop a plan, and there we go. Telling veterinarians that, since I've been a veterinarian forever, so I only think one way, we can use that same information, that same strategy for problem solving across the board. It makes things less daunting because it's something you're already familiar with.
I completely agree. It's much more relatable. I love your focus on the importance of the whole team and making sure that technicians are doing technician work and doctors are doing doctor work, and that we are able to support and work functionally with the customer service representatives so that the hospital flow is easier.
Yeah, and just another shameless plug for the Heartland. I'm very, very, I'm very, very lucky. I'm working with really, really talented RTD who has had experience as a hospital manager, Kristen Byris, and that she is doing a wonderful job as far as tiering is concerned. She's doing a wonderful job for tech development, and she's developing her tech supers. At the same time, we've got my Lori and the Rods are actually doing a CSR training, college type thing. Right. So we've identified needs, and they knew it was a need, and so they've already had some of the skeleton of a structure being put together. And so for me, it's easy. I'm working with doctors. I'm working with medicine. This is fun stuff. They're doing all those things that are challenging for operations that, as we as doctors kind of put those in the wayside, right? We just don't have as good or deep of understanding. I think that I tell commonly, have a story when I talk to my doctors and saying, sometimes you come up with an idea and you share it, and it turns out it wasn't so great. I know you and I have come up with some brilliant ideas in the past. Then we pass it by Lori, and she goes, "Did you think of this, and this?" And that perspective from someone who's who has got a wealth of knowledge in operations and a BCA just is so valuable. And you go, oh, maybe we can't do that. Huh. All right. Well, let's see how we can make it work. And it's a wonderfully humbling experience, but at the same time, it's a great learning experience.
As I suspected, you and I could probably talk for hours, and unfortunately, we're about at the end of our time. And I'll ask you in closing, any words of wisdom for someone who is just entering the profession?
It's the same message that I've always given them. I said, you've entered into an amazing profession. This is something that, not many people get rich. Some do, but in the end of the day, you know that you've done something good for every other species in this world, including the one that we don't treat, that you've taken somebody who wouldn't have gotten any care and showed them respect and showed them care and showed them that their life is worth living or his life is worth respecting. I think that's the crux of what we do. The other thing too is when you have bad days and at the end of the day, you have that client that's a little bit crabby or that case that didn't go well. One, think of the first statement, but more importantly, two, think of the other 99 previous cases where you actually made a difference, where you fixed something, where you made that puppy's tail wag, where you gave that kitty a new chance on life, where you help rescue both the owner and the client, because you will rescue an owner and a client because you just don't have a relationship with the dog. You have a relationship with that owner. This is an incredible thing to do. I can't think of anything I would rather do. I'm not suited for anything else. I'm a veterinarian, primary. Everything else is sort of, I read, but I'm a veterinarian, and that's what I do. And it's a great way to live.
Well, Tony, as always, every time I get to talk with you is absolutely wonderful, and I'm happy to call you a dear friend as well. And I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, and I feel the same way.
Well, thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to leave a review to let us know your thoughts, and share the episode with friends. Follow VCA Animal Hospitals on social media at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. For more inspiring stories, visit our website at vcavoice.com.